If ever a man met his moment as leader of this country, that man is George W. Bush.
For a time there, it looked like we were in for another long post-election battle for the White House. But today, when Ohio finally went into the Bush column, it was clear the president had scored a decisive re-election victory.
We had a long night and a great night. The voters turned out in record numbers and delivered an historic victory.
Everything we know about this election, everything about the turnout profile, tells us the exit polls were right. George Bush lost this election.
Aides say the president sees his victory as a clear mandate and plans to move aggressively on his agenda for a second term.
America has spoken, and I'm humbled by the trust and the confidence of my fellow citizens.
Wherever I went, what I found was long lines of voters and missing machines.
This was all across the inner city precincts, 2 to 3 hour waits, not enough machines, and broken down machines.
This Republican strategy for maximizing the vote for their candidate by any means possible more than likely cost Senator Kerry the campaign.
I see a great day coming for our country, and I am eager for the work ahead. God bless you, and may God bless America.
We see all these iceberg tips of anomalies, one after another. And guess what? Virtually all of them favoring George Bush.
Here in Columbus, Ohio's capital, voters waited as long as 2.5 hours today to cast their ballots.
People waiting in line for 9 hours to vote, some getting discouraged and actually going home without exercising their franchise.
People waiting for as long as 15 hours to vote in line because they only had 2 places to vote.
I'm trying to put together a popular-oriented book, and as a preliminary, I've been listing the different ways that the election was stolen in Ohio, and I've at this moment I'm at 36. So I expect to get to about 50. The scope of the theft is almost unfathomable. And I think it's one of the reasons people have difficulty dealing with it, is because they did so many different things.
They knew we had a record turnout this year. They did nothing to accommodate us. Nothing.
There should have been 14 voting machines at this site. There were only 6.
Working people in the morning had to leave because they couldn't stay in line for 2 hours.
There was one phone number for every precinct in the county to call with problems, so needless to say, every time we tried to reach them during the day, it was busy.
Bush and Kerry, they made all these trips to Ohio for our votes. They should have been here today. You know, they should see what's going on.
If they had just gone in there and rigged the voting machines, or had just gone in there and miscounted the ballots, or had just intimidated people, or had just sent out fake flyers telling Democrats to vote on Wednesday, maybe people could have figured it out. But they realized, I think, that they were going to have to pick up quite a few votes, and it was a full court press.
During the hours of 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m., everyone was turned away due to broken machines.
What I saw
was voter intimidation in the form of city employees that were sent in to stop illegal parking.
I attempted to vote in the same place that I voted in the primaries and was told that my name was not on the rolls.
On Franklin County, there are no votes for David Cobb. Well, that's a problem. I voted for David Cobb.
It was clear that something had happened that deserved to be put on the record. The election day process itself was a huge, confused. The lines were long, the machines were misallocated.
Every county had its own story, almost literally. There are 88 counties in Ohio, and there were riggings going on in every different way that you can imagine in every different county.
The polls had opened an hour late. They did not open until about 7:30 a.m. The polling machines were locked in the principal's office. Hundreds of people were turned away, were forced to leave the line because they needed to be at school, they needed to be at work, or they needed to take their children to school.
We had 2 voting machines for 1,300 people in our county. One of which was broken for 2 hours, the first 2 hours of the day, from 6:30 to 8:30.
For me to sit in the precinct in which I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, 10 days after the election and listen to scores of people, black and white, talk about how they were denied their vote in the year 2004 in Columbus, Ohio, is an assault on everything that we were raised to believe.
These were things and practices that you could see were happening that were not fair, were not encouraging voting, and that were pretty blatant as well.
The targeting of people of color and of people without means is very political and very computerized. It's not as if they're out there saying, well, we don't want black people to vote and we don't want poor people to vote. What they're saying is black people are voting Democratic, poor people are voting Democratic, therefore we want to eliminate their votes. It's an easy matrix to work from, they're identifiable, and so if a Republican wants to win an election, can start with the people of color.
People are getting out to vote. There's lines everywhere, 3-hour wait. People were kind of, at first, enthusiastic that so many people came out to vote.
And everybody's like, I'm staying here. I don't care if I have to stand here all day. I am gonna vote.
The rain ain't gonna stop nobody. And in the beginning, in the morning, at 6:30 in the morning, you would think, yes, this is good. But then at 2 o'clock, when the lines are still out the door and you have a 2 to 3 hour wait to vote and you can't stand in the line that long.
It's like, well, why should anyone have to stand here all day to vote?
We had testimony that some people stayed up until 12 hours in the line, which to me borders on criminal conduct, to put citizens through that kind of a oppressive, unendurable situation.
And it was so blatantly obvious that the inner city machines were missing, making it difficult and inconvenient for American citizens to cast their constitutional right to a vote.
The interminably long lines that African Americans and young people on college campuses suffered was the result of a very conscious decision on allocating voting machines. To my knowledge, that's a new game. I had never known of it before. That clearly happened in this election.
It's all happening in the inner city with the most vulnerable and unprotected part of the population, mostly, African American and Latino, and that's Jim Crow.
Election day, went to my polling place to vote. I was told that I wasn't on the register. And I said, what do you mean my name's not on the roster? They said, well, it's not on the roster. And I was like, well, I voted here in the primary, so what am I supposed to do? And they said, well, you can sign a provisional ballot. Come to find out later, I followed up. My vote was never counted. I'm a child of the 60s. I grew up watching water hoses being turned on people. I knew what these people were fighting for, you know, and that is people being able to determine the direction of this country. And when you take that away, we're no better than any other country in the world. I guess I'll vote next time too, because a lot of people fought and died for my right to vote, and I know that. Even though my vote didn't count, maybe my words will make a point and sharpen people's appetites to really want to make it right.
It was clear after the election that something very unusual had happened and the vote had been manipulated. We needed a common meeting place so that we could discuss strategies for preventing this from happening again. We're here for 2 days to focus on the one thing we all can agree on, which is the fundamental necessity to trust our voting process if we are going to be a democracy in something other than name only.
A new ABC News poll has found that the race in Pennsylvania is, as they say, drum tight. 49% for President Bush, 48% for Senator Kerry. That is a statistical tie.
The election of 2004 was unprecedented in Pennsylvania. We had unprecedented new registrations. We had unprecedented participation. There were rallies. There were more yard signs than you ever saw before.
I've been a poll worker for 15 years in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, and I knew the night of the election there was something desperately wrong with our election. Some of the precincts in the one county in particular, there was an 80% undervote. That means 8 out of 10 people who came to the poll to vote on November 2nd did not care enough about the presidential race to vote for. I don't think so.
Traditionally in Pennsylvania, the presidential undervote, this is people that did not select any candidate for president, is approximately 1 to 3%. In some precincts, those undervotes were as high as 70% and 80%. The officials in these counties blame voter error and lack of voter education. Always we blame the voter.
When you see 42%, 70%, and 80% undervotes in the precinct in this election, it's not real. There's something desperately not right.
This was the site of the closest race 4 years ago. Al Gore won the state by just 366 votes, and the Bush campaign believes that if it can get a few more of those Hispanic votes, they can actually win this state and its 5 electoral college votes.
We think it's very likely that the outcome of the presidential election in New Mexico was affected by the irregularities when you add them all up. We found precincts and clusters of precincts where the rate at which people seemed to have not voted for president was up above 25%. When voters from that same precinct, those voters' neighbors, went to vote in early voting, their undervote rate was down under 1%. The undervote problem was concentrated in Native American and Hispanic areas of the state. Statistically, we know that Native American communities and Hispanic communities in New Mexico overwhelmingly supported Mr. Kerry as their candidate at rates of 85% or higher. So when it appears that people have gone in and not even selected a presidential candidate, what's been lost are Democratic votes that could actually skew the outcome of the election.
the presidential race looks jar-lid tight. We could be in for a long night as voters decide whether Vice President Al Gore or Texas Governor George Bush will be the next president of the United States. It is that close.
I was in Austin on election night in 2000, and we just didn't know what was being thrown at us.
CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column.
In blue, the important pivotal state of Florida to Vice President Al Gore.
Bulletin, Florida pulled back into the undecided column.
All we could see was that this was the screwiest election imaginable.
This thing is so wild, wacky, and woolly, nobody knows how it's going to come out.
With Florida being announced for Al Gore, taken out of the Gore column.
CNN right now is moving Florida to the too close to call column.
Too close to call.
Florida is now too close to call. I want to say that again. It's a confusing situation. Now, if you're disgusted with us, frankly, I don't blame you.
The whole election being called for Bush prematurely and then being uncalled for Bush.
CBS News has now, for the second time tonight, pulled back Florida.
So we take Florida away from George W. Bush.
We don't entirely trust all the information.
Quite honestly, we now don't know what to make of Florida.
Al Gore's concession and then his retraction of his concession.
Put me on. Gore has retracted his concession.
Too close at this point to make a concession speech.
He called to say, look, we think it's too close. I'm going to retract that concession.
And finally, there's complete confusion at the end of a very long night, and everybody just bewildered and thinking, what is going on?
Could we just review this again about how...
Well, I think in the fullness of time tonight, we're going to have an explanation for this.
We don't know what's going to happen tonight. We've been saying it all night long, and we've just proven it. Could you pass the crow?
We had the corruption of the media environment because the person who called the election for Bush was his own cousin, who was working for Fox News at the time, and then all the other networks unquestioningly followed Fox News rather than doing their own analysis.
Bush wins.
CNN declares that George Walker Bush has won.
George Bush is the president-elect of the United States.
ABC News is now going to project that Florida goes to Mr. Bush.
One of the closest elections in American history. Bush has won it.
You had all these other delicious wrinkles in the situation. The fact that the Republican candidate's brother was the governor of the state where all the controversy was going on.
Your brother said in one of his speeches, my brother said he's going to deliver Florida.
he did say that. He said it more than once.
Will you deliver it?
He also told me that it was going to be a cold Thanksgiving dinner if I don't help him out, and then we're going to carry it.
Catherine Harris, who was the Secretary of State, was doubling as co-chair of George Bush's election campaign.
Governor George W. Bush, 2,912,790.
So there were all these situations which, had they happened in some other emerging country from the former Soviet Union, the United States probably would have been front and center in denouncing these things as evidence of corruption. Suddenly it's happening in the world's most powerful country.
We are waiting now to what could be rather significant rulings in this race for the White House.
The Supreme Court intervened and stopped the counting at exactly the critical moment.
Just getting word from Associated Press that the U.S. Supreme Court has set aside the ruling on hand-counted votes in Florida.
Even though Al Gore won the popular vote, he lost in the one state that would make the difference between who would be president.
African Americans promised a payback at the polls. They delivered in record numbers, but on Election Day, thousands of their votes didn't count.
The Civil Rights Commission did a series of hearings on what happened in the election, long after Bush v. Gore was decided.
Harris faced an hour of intense questioning from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights.
What standards do you provide? And let's start with the standards to be used in the recount.
I'm going to let Mr. Roberts address this legal question.
Thank you.
I thought Catherine Harris's description of her role was laughable, ha, ha, ha. We got almost uniformly from the poll workers and from the people who made the allegations that there was widespread disenfranchisement of various kinds. And we concluded, based on that and some statistical analysis, that African Americans were 10 times more likely to be denied the right to vote than whites were in that election.
Wake up! Wake up! Count the votes, baby! Don't be afraid!
The 2000 election illustrated that there was a real problem. The patient was sick. American democracy was not in a good way. The doctors came along and they really made the wrong diagnosis. They said the problem is the machines. If we have better machines, everything will be fine. So there was an almighty rush to believe that computers were the solution.
About 29% of registered voters, that's about 50 million people, are expected to use these electronic touchscreen machines next week. That's about double the number in the last election, and there is some concern.
These are new machines.
When we use electronic voting machines, we can think of it as a black box because we as human beings cannot look into that computer and see the internal bits. It's hidden from us. So as far as we're concerned, it could be just a big black box.
Is there any type of paper receipt that you get that confirms your vote?
No. The only confirmation you get is on the machine.
Since we can't see inside there, we can't know or we can't feel sure that what goes in terms of our votes stays there and actually gets counted.
There's a fundamental problem with the whole concept of a computer touchscreen machine. If there's a problem, there's no way of identifying the problem and fixing it if you have a machine that does not involve paper.
I want to mention something about conspiracy. No one has yet explained to my satisfaction the difference between a conspiracy and a long-range business plan. My primary area of activity has been to alert people to the dangers of electronic voting. The voter, him or herself, cannot determine whether or not their ballot choices have been recorded accurately in the computer. The computer can show one thing on the screen, but be recording something else internally. But the second and worst problem is that nobody can observe the ballots being counted. This is the fraudulent voting machine, and it's a demonstration that shows people what's wrong with electronic voting. It says, click here to start voting. That's where the voter goes into the booth. There's only one race because it's only a demonstration for teaching purposes. John Doe versus Mary Smith for president. I'm going to vote John Doe. I go to verify my ballot. And if there's no voter verified paper audit trail and there's no audit, everybody thinks that this is good. Because I voted for John Doe, it says John Doe, I say correct. It says poll worker may close the booth, we'll assume it's the end of the election day. And here's my final total. Now you can see that the vote was switched. But here's the kicker. If you're the election director, you are 100% within your rights to say, we had a perfect election. We had one voter, we have one ballot. I see no problems. And that's the problem with electronic voting. You see no problems.
What you really need is either a paper ballot in the first place, or you need to develop an electronic device where you vote on the electronic interface, and then the machine itself produces a paper ballot based on your choices that you then look at and put in the ballot box in the old-fashioned way.
Computers are the new 21st century threat to fair and full and democratic participation in the voting process.
In North Carolina, over 4,000 ballots are gone forever, lost when a voting machine passed its arbitrary limit. In South Florida, election officials were horrified to see vote totals start counting down after they hit 32,000.
One of the insidious things about touchscreen voting machines is that if there is foul play, it can, at least in theory, be perpetrated invisibly. You can cover your tracks completely.
All three voting systems have significant security and reliability vulnerabilities, which pose a real danger to the integrity of national and state elections.
Even if there is auditability in the system, the programmer, the rogue programmer, can change the audit trail as well. And this is something that's unprecedented.
You can change the software, you can infect the system with a virus.
Gaming systems, like your Microsoft Xbox 360 or Sony PlayStation 3, are engineered to resist a wide variety of tampering attacks. That level of engineering is entirely absent from voting machines.
With these machines, you can alter the outcome of a national election undetectably in a way that is just unprecedented in terms of its reach and the power to really play around. For those reasons, we should be much more careful of these machines than we've ever been in the past, and the evidence is actually we're being less careful.
I grew up during Vietnam and Watergate, and to me, the press is the fourth estate, the great watchdog. But the American press was not, in January of 2004, reporting anything about electronic voting. It's like it didn't even exist. They had me in as a temp word processor, and I was working the second shift at night and just typing all manner of documents and charts and memos, whatever they needed. There was a tape that the attorney brought down, and hearing what was on the tape was just part of my job. I put in that tape and start listening, and the attorney says, okay, this is a memo to file. The client is Diebold Election Systems, Inc. That night, all I did was my job. I typed up, transcribed the tape, and proofed it, and put it in the out bin, and that was it. But my mind was racing. And I went home and lay awake all night thinking about it. I certainly wasn't an expert, but I knew enough to know that what I was reading was smoking gun proof that they were using illegal, uncertified software in their voting machines, that they knew it was illegal, and that they were lying to the state and the taxpayers and the voters about the use of this illegal software.
What the documents show is Diebold had gotten themselves into significant legal jeopardy by going around to the counties that had sold machines and constantly upgrading the software and doing it in such a way that they weren't actually getting approval for these software upgrades. When you're constantly changing the software, you can be substantially changing what it is doing on election day.
Early today, problems with electronic voting machines, as some voters were turned away when the machines weren't functioning properly.
Two of the largest counties in California essentially saw the majority of their polling places fall apart. So you had literally thousands of voters in those counties who just couldn't vote. This is a direct result of the representations and the misrepresentations, really, that Diebold and its attorneys made to the state of California. What the documents show is that Diebold's troubles had gotten to be so profound that there was a recognition within the company and its law firm, Jones Day, that they had in fact broken the law in California.
I went to the Oakland Tribune website and I saw some of the documents online, and I thought, wow, there they are. I wanted it to be exposed, and I thought, my work here is done.
Within 4 days, there was a hearing. Now, it had been a scheduled hearing, but the content of that hearing now involved Jones Day's attorneys being questioned by a panel, which was gathered from the Office of the Secretary of State. Within days, they had decertified the Diebold machines involved and referred Diebold for criminal prosecution.
These documents had a very significant impact on the ultimate decision to remove a lot of that equipment from use in California elections.
It was actually Friday the 13th, just after dawn, and there's a simultaneous pounding on the front door and the doorbell ringing at the same time. And I open the door, and there's 10 Los Angeles police officers there and one investigator from the DA's office. I thought, this is a mistake.
When Stephen came to me, there were no charges. There was only the execution of a search warrant authored by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. This was in August of 2004, on the eve of a national presidential election. It was over 18 months before the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office actually charged Mr. Heller, which I, to this day, find very interesting.
I was charged with 3 felonies. It was unauthorized access to a computer, and receiving stolen property, and theft by computer.
This was newsworthy in a big way because you had a whistleblower, and in fact that's what Stephen Heller was, and he was being treated like a common criminal.
The great irony here is that while there's enormous statutory civil protection for whistleblowers, at the end of the day there is not criminal protection.
I violated attorney-client privilege, and that is a very serious crime. And I pled guilty to that crime, and I'm taking responsibility for it. But what is illegal is not always wrong. I had to pay a $10,000 fine to the law firm. I had to sign a statement of apology to the law firm. And I'm on felony probation.
I think we will forever chill whistleblowers from coming forward. And I think it's the exact wrong message we want to send to citizens about misconduct they uncover.
The state of California has ordered that some 15,000 brand new touchscreen voting machines manufactured by the Diebold Company not be used next week. Officials say there are serious flaws with the machines and that the company has repeatedly misled the state.
They really, literally engage in absolutely deplorable behavior, and to the extent that they put the election at risk, jeopardizing the outcome of the election.
A very difficult ethical choice had to be made, but the information was very important and actually could affect the future of the free world. That sounds like it's an awful big container to put this in. But when you understand that this company was making the machines that counted 33 million votes in a presidential election, then if they are conspiring behind the scenes to tell untruths and to mislead a Secretary of State, you've got to have concern over whether you should trust their secret software.
When I saw those documents, I had to do something. If our elections are crooked, then our democracy isn't there anymore. And I'm just not willing to let that go. I'm not willing to let liberty and freedom go.
What has changed in terms of the role of private companies has been the technology. With the new generation of touchscreens, it's very hard to find people who really understand enough about the machines to use them properly.
What do y'all want this machine to do? Excuse me.
So the default position is asking the private companies to provide their own technicians to come in and effectively run the election on behalf of the public.
The absolute control over the election process that a company like Diebold potentially could have, from tabulation to the software that's inside, it's concerning to people.
It shouldn't be. I'll be blunt. Diebold does not control the elections.
Voters should not have to rely on any private company for the security and fundamental fairness of their election system.
If you privatize the votes and allow private companies with secret software
to essentially count your votes for you and they're partisans of the president, then of course they'll steal the vote because we've made it easy for them.
So if you're starting to abdicate that responsibility to private for-profit companies who have every interest in making themselves look good long before they worry about having integrity in the process, then you're beginning to seriously compromise the bedrock of American democracy.
(1:51 p.m. Tuesday. As Air Force One touches down at Andrews Air Force Base, the president first learns of network exit polls showing Kerry ahead throughout the battleground. Dejected, Mr. Bush tells his confidant, Karen Hughes, the numbers are what they are. I'm surprised.
It caused celebration among Kerry forces, panic and then disbelief on the president's team. It even caused the markets on Wall Street to drop sharply. These polls are paid for by a consortium of major news organizations, NBC News included.
The evening of the election, having seen the exit polls released during the day and having seen the tally turn out so differently in the evening, to me that was a shock of the first magnitude. And in fact, you know, to use an analogy from the financial services industry, it was the world's loudest burglar alarm. And to my, I guess, shock and amazement, nobody was listening.
The exit polls have been used by the networks to project election results with great accuracy through the years. We've relied on the exit polls for many elections now. They have a history of at least 40 years. In 2004, we saw something very different. The discrepancy between the exit polls and the vote counts was off the charts, and this was a new phenomenon.
The exit polls were more accurate than the voting that took place that they were supposed to be measuring.
It's certainly much more convenient if you want to believe in the future of your democracy, you don't want to have your whole day ruined, to basically say, well, of course the tabulated votes, that's gospel, and the exit polls must have had a methodological flaw. If you look at the exit poll sample as a whole, there were some 13,000 individuals chosen to be a nationally representative sample. A sample size of 13,000 generates a margin of error less than 1%. What we saw was a discrepancy that was so much greater than that.
Statistics can tell you what the chances are when you interview 13,000 people that you'd be that far off. And you know, it's somewhere, I won't bore you with the numbers, but it's somewhere between, you know, astronomically impossible and ludicrously impossible. So it just didn't happen by chance.
Nearly all the experts are in agreement that the exit polls could not have been so far off that they gave distorted results. It's far more rational to assume that the voting process was compromised.
When you look at the pipeline through which the popular vote actual tabulations travel, how immensely easy it is to rig that at so many levels, and the computer security experts and computer experts have been screaming about this for 15 years, basically. There is more methodological consistency, development, nonpartisanship to the exit polls by far than there is to the tabulated vote.
It didn't take too much investigation to see that a lot of people were disrespected and essentially disenfranchised. I mean, it has nothing to do with, was the election stolen? It was, could people vote when they wanted to vote? And the answer was no. Certain people couldn't do that. That just gets my blood boiling. If I'm too outrageous, if I write, for instance, precisely what I believe, that the election was stolen, if I use the F word, fraud, well, there's a good chance the editors will think I'm a lunatic, and they'll fill the hole with some other columnist's words. Like any other American citizen that was concerned about the issue, I just kept waiting for the media to tell us, you know, to look into it and to say, here's what happened, and it won't happen again. And it just never happened.
Saw a poll today showing that 80% of the country believes the president won the election in a fair vote. The other 20% write me.
You know, there's like a corral around this issue, beyond which the mainstream media just doesn't want to go.
We've been a little surprised by how many emails we've had suggesting that maybe once again the country got it wrong. Now, we're not particularly disposed to conspiracy theories. As you know, Mr. Bush won by a very comfortable margin of more than 3 million votes.
There is a groupthink that happens. And the groupthink is, you know, it's a bandwagon.
There were no problems that would lead me to believe that there were stolen elections or widespread fraud.
Not according to some people who have devised various theories.
Websites hostile to the president claim massive vote fraud, that Senator Kerry really won.
And it just became apparent that there wasn't a will in the mainstream media to take this issue and do anything with it.
And what about those early exit polls giving Kerry the lead? They say that means the election was stolen. Convinced?
A respected reporter that tried to make the case that there was election fraud would definitely look silly, would feel silly, you know, because it's this conspiracy, it's the nutcase file. And I mean, everything gets swept into the nutcase file that suggests that there's anything irregular.
Clearly, for many people, however, results are not enough.
Even as the corporate media ignores the story, ordinary citizens are rolling up their sleeves and getting the job done, working on a litany of election reforms that are critically important to create and democratize our elections in this country.
This evidence was only brought to the attention of the American people, if at all, by community radio, by independent media, by bloggers, by the internet. Something really powerful took place around this story, and this story would not die.
I come from the school of journalism, I.F. Stone, that says everything we need to know is in the public record. I've made a career out of investigative reporting based on simply reading government documents. Often, the mainstream media doesn't do this. They had an explanation for the famous Gehenna Ward 1B machine, where 638 people voted, and miraculously the president got 4,258 votes in one of the greatest faith-based miracles of modern time. Now leave it to the Dispatch to get to the bottom of that. I'm watching ONN one day. ONN reports the machine was fatigued. After 638 votes were cast, you know how your computer gets fatigued.
Far and away, more than anything else I've ever written about, there's concern about this issue. So that says to me the public is awake and activated, which makes the question, where is the media, a crucial question. The media is
protecting its interests. There is no interest in bringing down another president. There's only interest in making the world safe for media mergers.
There was an African-American man who was an accountant who had come to me and asked for the opportunity to place a bid to provide Georgia with its electronic voting machines. His name was Ethan Gibbs.
Ethan was horrified about the 2000 elections, not necessarily whether the Democrats or Republicans won, but the fact is that millions of people's vote didn't count.
In the 2000 election, there were 180,000 uncounted votes in Florida. There were over 80,000 uncounted votes in the state of Georgia. In Cook County, there were 62,000 uncounted votes. There's the real problem.
He had a very simple concept, that you should be able to verify your vote just like you can verify your money in a bank and the money you get out of an ATM machine.
The machine prints out a paper ballot that shows who you voted for. Once you verify that the ballot accurately recorded who you voted for, you drop it into a ballot box. The machine still counts the votes on election night, but if there's a challenge by one of the candidates, it's the paper ballot that gets counted.
There are a lot of folks who sold us machinery in the past, who want to sell us machinery in the future, that do not live up to the Ethan Gibbs standard. Machines that don't live up to the Democratic standard. And we shouldn't accept second best.
There can never be any uncounted votes where the voter does not have an opportunity to verify that their votes have been received, recorded, and counted.
He'd say, you're an investigative reporter, why don't you report? And I'd say, well, you know, why is he bugging me? You know, I mean, I don't see any story here. He said, you know, think about this. Diebold is an ATM machine maker. Every single one of their ATM machines gives you a receipt and has an audit trail. And he told me, I'm coming this as an accountant and an auditor, right? Is why would you make a machine that doesn't provide a paper trail and can't be audited? And he left it at that, and I said, that's a good question. And I began to trace the history, and then I wrote an article right after that, which is a cover story in the Free Press. And then Harvey Wasserman and I wrote a follow-up article for MotherJones.com. The great tragedy was 1 week after the Free Press article occurred and the Mother Jones article occurred, about 1 week, Ethan Gibbs died in a tragic accident where his car veered in front of a truck.
I was scheduled to speak out in California, and I wanted him to go with me and to demonstrate his machine. So I called him on the Thursday, and I asked him to come. Meanwhile, I get out to California. I get a phone call saying he's been in a terrible accident.
I think he'd be very disappointed because he worked hard on it for years. He got the attention of big companies like Microsoft, and it's not easy to get their attention. And I think he would be sorely disappointed that we haven't lived up to either his dream or the American dream.
I think we owe it to Ethan Gibbs to make sure that his vision for a true, real, verifiable vote happens in the United States.
If you don't know that your vote is counted and counted fairly, why then we have no democracy. It becomes ruled by a small group of elite insiders who manipulate what looks like a democracy for their own advantage. They're happy with the way it is right now. When some voters are intimidated, some voters don't participate, we make a burden on voting so that they get to rule instead of the will of the people. Here we are exporting democracy around the world, not only in Iraq, but many other countries, Ukraine with the Orange Revolution, and some of those countries have a better voting system than we do. Give me a break. We owe the American people a better job at this so that it's simple and clear. You vote and your vote will count.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes.
How do you know that to be the case?
Because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for President Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I worked for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And would that program that you designed be something that elections officials could detect?
They'd never see it.
And your testimony is under oath?
Yes, sir.
And the testimony you've given is true?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
In 2000, I was working for Young Enterprises, which was a company in Oviedo, Florida, and their chief lobbyist, their corporate attorney, and Speaker of the House of Florida was Tom Feeney.
Tom Feeney was the general counsel and registered lobbyist for Young Enterprises, even while he was Speaker of the Florida House.
He came in one day, one of my first introductions to him, and he wanted us to build a vote flipping software.
He was asked by Tom Feeney to create essentially a vote rigging software prototype.
My interpretation initially was that he wanted to prevent you evil Democrats, because I was a Republican, from cheating. So we know how bad you are. So, he's a Republican, I'm a Republican, which, immediately makes him the good guy right away. So obviously he's not going to try and, steal votes. He wanted it to run on a Windows platform, be touchscreen capable. He wanted it to not have any additional hardware, so you didn't have to bring in a keyboard, you didn't have to sit across the street in a truck. You could just sit there and punch a button, and the votes all flip. And the third thing he wanted was that he wanted so that in the source code, you could not see the fact that it was being flipped. Well, not only you shouldn't be doing that, but you can't do that. You cannot hide in the source code. Done deal. I can't do it. Nobody else can either.
Tom Feeney is best known for being the guy in the 2000 election. No matter what the Supreme Court decided, he was going to assure that the electoral votes went to George W. Bush. He had previously, in 1994, been the running mate to Jeb Bush in Jeb's initial bid for governor in Florida, which he lost.
So I built it for him, gave it to Mrs. Yang along with the sheet on how you prevent vote fraud. She said, "You don't understand. In order to get this contract, we have to hide the vote fraud in the source code. This is to flip the vote in South Florida." Which, I'm thinking, what are you, a crook?
We can only assume that that's what Feeney told her. For some reason, that's what she felt, that's what she knew, and that's what she told Clint Curtis. And that's what he has in his sworn affidavit.
He had a lot of political theory about, you don't have to actually beat the Democrats in the Democratic area, you just have to reduce the margin enough so overall it weakens it. And you win that way, and he's just a wild man. He was willing to do anything to win. And I'm thinking, well, these people are crooked, but they're probably crazy. No one's going to sit by and let them do this anyway. They tried to bribe me to come back to them. Eventually it got up to, $1 million. So give me $1 million to come back. Then it was $1 million to just leave Tallahassee. And Feeney will get me a job anywhere I want to work. Anywhere. Name the price, name the location, you're there. Now that you've got your vote and you want to flip it, you hit the R, hit the S, and it flips. Bush wins.
That's simple.
That's simple. 24 lines of code, you never see it. Kind of felt responsible, like I wrote a blueprint for him. Not that I'm the only one in the world who could do that, you know. Any baby programmer would know how to do that. It is super easy. It takes nothing. It's just some hidden buttons on a screen. You hit the little hidden buttons. It gives 51% to the guy you want to win, gives the other 49. So it doesn't matter how you vote, the machine votes for you.
So in other words, there is absolutely no assurance whatsoever on anything with regard to these machines?
Absolutely none, unless you look at the source code and make sure it's safe before it goes in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Mathers. I know that Congresswoman Waters has...
Clint Curtis announced that he was going to run against Tom Feeney for that U.S. House seat. He changed his party affiliation from Republican to Democrat.
One of the reasons I switched is because all those Republican values of balanced budget and personal privacy, the Republicans have just discarded that.
He did extraordinarily well for a first-time politician.
We'll actually compare our vote totals to the vote totals that came in precinct by precinct. We'll find out if any flip occurred, and we'll validate it.
He and his campaign have, since the election, been going door to door, getting affidavits from voters, how they voted in the election.
If we can find several precincts where we have more voters who said they voted for me than the votes show, that puts into question not only my totals, but the whole election.
In some of these areas, he's finding 20% swings against him, and he's got the affidavits from voters to prove it.
I grew up thinking you're supposed to do the right thing, and that's what I do. I'll do it until someone makes it so I can't.
There's no room in our Republican form of government for either side, any party, to be rigging elections. And my feeling is Democrat or Republican, if they're rigging elections or screwing with the electoral process, they've got to go, period.
It really is nonpartisan. And the manipulation that goes on is by party operatives at a pretty high level.
This cannot be viewed through a partisan prism. It's just simply not the case that Democrats care about a transparent process and Republicans don't. The reason why that perception has arisen is because Republicans have been winning elections and it's Democrats who've been aggrieved.
This issue really is the hub at the center of all the other concerns that people have. And you see people, whether it's Save the Whales or Save the Forests or Save Social Security, whatever it is, working very hard on these individual issues and perhaps not recognizing that if elections continue to be rigged, their work is going to be for naught.
Democratic rank-and-file voters and Republican rank-and-file voters have to come together, understand they have a common interest in having a proper voting system, and fight on that basis to get public officials to improve the system.
I'm Bruce Funk. I'm from Emery County, Utah, a small rural community of Clawson. I'm a Republican. I have been elected county clerk in Emery County for 23 years. The vote, I think that's the individual thing that makes this country. And throughout my whole career, that was the thing that I oversaw and was most important. Well, we went through the acceptance and testing, and I found that I had 8 machines which had low backup memory. And I'm thinking, well, what does this mean? Diebold's responses, I haven't received any from the people I've talked to, I know at this time that the election official for the state of Utah has no election experience. As an election official, I thought it was my duty to assure the integrity of elections. And I'm looking at a situation that I didn't know what it meant.
So we came in and took a look at these machines and found what was later reported in the New York Times as the nuclear bomb of security flaws for electronic voting machines.
A new study finds hackers can easily tamper with electronic voting machines by installing a virus to disable machines and change vote totals.
They were shocked at what they found. It was the most severe security problem they had ever seen.
Since then, we have seen one test after another showing these systems can be hacked with a virus in 60 seconds, which can be passed from machine to machine, flip an entire election, and no one will ever see it.
At Princeton University, Professor Edward Felton shows us how to hack a Diebold voting machine.
The voting machine virus is on this memory card.
The machines all use the same key to unlock them, a very low-tech number commonly used for luggage or desk furniture.
Anyone who can get the door open and stick in a memory card can insert a virus or do whatever they like.
The Princeton group only studied one type of machine. That model will be used in 357 counties across the country by 10% of the voters in November.
Anytime you find a problem in a machine that's manufactured, that's used in thousands and thousands of locations, counting millions of votes, it's not an issue with Emery County, Utah. This is an issue of national security.
This only happened because a guy like Bruce Funk said, I'd like to know what we're using, come on in and give them a look.
It could change the outcome of every election. Whoever was in power could stay in power and manipulate the elections, whether on a local level, state level, or a national level.
The lawyers for Diebold were flown to Emery County, where they had a meeting behind closed doors, and when Bruce Funk, an elected official, showed up for work the next day, he was locked out of his office.
They did not want to know what was in those machines. They were not interested. They were strictly there to get rid of me. The commission chairman came by my office. I said, I'm not going to resign. I said, I believe I need to be here and document exactly what Diebold does to those machines. And he told me, he says, that's not going to happen.
It was treated as a national security issue by the top scientists in the U.S. It made the New York Times, the Washington Post, Newsweek, CNN, but Bruce Funk lost his job. How do you have a private corporation come in and exercise any kind of control over an elected official? Basically what that means is you had a private corporation saying the will of the people doesn't count in Emery County, Utah. You elected him, we say he's out, so he's out.
This has not been easy. It has been very hurtful. I have lost a lot of good friends, but down in my heart I know it's right, and we have to fight this battle, and we don't stop for a moment.
Nobody had his back, but what he did actually could have saved us from an even bigger meltdown in 2006 had they not solved that problem. It was so bad that states pulled the machines off the shelves and issued emergency security fixes at the last minute before the primary election in 2006.
I can't think of anything more important to do with my life than to try and save our democracy, because the vote is the very core of that democracy. If our vote doesn't count, how can we call this democracy?
The
question of which party controls the House or the Senate or both may turn on 1, 2, who knows, maybe half a dozen elections, so close that the final outcome will rest on compromised vote counts.
The mainstream media finally did help this election in 2006. We saw a lot of stories in the month or two leading up to the election.
California officials have learned in recent days that the state's most widely used electronic voting machines can be manipulated to let voters cast ballots over and over and over again.
If you can hack into computers at some of the most secret federal agencies in the country, why can't people hack into these voting machines? It's crazy.
And this is going to impact elections. And I'm not talking about Republicans or Democrats. It's going to screw candidates on both sides of the aisle.
Throughout 2006, election after election in the primaries, we saw systems break down. We saw voters not be able to even cast a vote.
In Maryland, the recent primaries were such a debacle and disaster that the governor is now arguing that the state should altogether scrap the entire electronic voting system and return immediately to paper ballots.
I have doubt whether they can be fixed in 7 weeks. And so my issue here is you have an election coming, you're going to have a lot of people, a couple million people voting. Why take a risk?
The public outcry over electronic voting machines is intensifying.
Across the country, there is a groundswell of action to challenge electronic voting machines and their use in November.
We have oversight over whether
It was a Wall Street Journal article that talked about this new breed of activists who are out there and who no longer trust the way our election system goes.
Just arrived here at the voting office, and guess what? No electricity in the predominantly black districts around here. And yet, for some reason, there's electricity right across the street, but there's no electricity here at the voting place.
What you're seeing is citizens vigilance at the grassroots level.
Just to be sure that my vote was counted correctly, I took my cell phone into the booth and I held up my ID along with the vote that I cast that was lit up, and I took a picture of it. I just wanted to be absolutely sure that it was documented right.
If you want this country to do everything in its power to protect you, and at the same time lay the foundation of peace for generations to come, vote Republican.
It was basically free fall for the Republicans in the month of October. There was Mark Foley, the major scandal.
Florida Republican Congressman Mark Foley resigned today, effective immediately, after sexually explicit messages sent to underage boys surfaced.
A scandal like this could end up helping the Democrats win more seats in November.
And the news from Iraq was all bad.
As the problems in Iraq get worse, so do problems for Republicans here at home.
52% of likely voters told us they plan to vote for the Democratic candidate for the House, 34% the Republican. That 18% gap is the biggest since we started asking the question back in 1980.
What a difference 2 years has made. 38% approve of the job Mr. Bush is doing, while 60% disapprove.
The most fundamental, essential ingredient of a democracy is, from time to time, a vote of the people. The climate now is to sweep them out of office. And the question is, will our election work the way it's supposed to allow that to happen?
We can now project that the Democrats will be the majority in the next House of Representatives. That means Nancy Pelosi will be the Speaker of the House.
If you look at race by race, it was close. The cumulative effect, however, was not too close. It was a thumping.
Because the Democratic Party won the 2006 election, many people came away with the feeling that our electoral process had worked. But that just wasn't the case. There was more citizen vigilance in 2006, and that probably did some good. But the vast majority of election fraud is now computerized, and it's invisible.
When it's counted inside a machine that no one can see, it doesn't matter how many people you have watching.
In one congressional race, there are charges that thousands of votes were cast but not counted. And the results were close enough that those votes could well have made the difference. And where is this congressional district? In Florida.
In Sarasota, as the 13th congressional district, there was an apparent undervote, of 18,000.
Republican Vern Buchanan issued a statement claiming victory by a razor-thin margin, 368 votes.
We won!
Not so fast, says Democrat Christine Jennings, who couldn't help noticing that in the Democratic-leaning Sarasota County part of the district, 18,000 people, or 13% of voters who cast ballots in other races, had no recorded vote in this race.
It's unheard of in a very competitive race for 13% of the voters to say, we're not voting, we don't care.
One of the things I want to find out is what happened to 18,000 votes that were not counted for this election.
Sarasota County uses a controversial electronic voting machine that gives no paper record.
These undervotes were concentrated in Democratic strongholds, and the great majority of these votes would have been cast for Christine Jennings, the Democratic candidate, giving her the victory.
Go, Chris, go! People want to know that their vote counts, and this is about the confidence that the voters of this country have in their voting system.
In 2006, I mean, we were set up in a war room in Philadelphia. We were better prepared for 2006 than we were for 2004. We certainly had our eye on the official exit polls run by the networks and the Associated Press. They actually released results of these exit polls before they were adjusted to conform to the vote totals, as has become the custom. And these results showed a resounding Democratic victory of 11.5%. When the vote totals came in later that night and the next day, the Democratic victory was 7.6%. And that represented a loss of 3 million votes nationwide. The exit poll was based on interviews with more than 10,000 voters, and this group gave President Bush a higher approval rating than the population at large. So this was no oversampling of Democrats. If anything, they lean more Republican. Statistically speaking, when you interview that many voters, the odds that your polling will be off by 4% are about 1 in 10,000. Election 2006 is certainly not telling us that pre-election concerns were overblown and it's safe to go back in the water. It gives us no reason to assume that our elections will be run fairly and honestly, just the opposite. Look at the pattern of the past few elections. We have every reason to believe that the 2008 election is going to be manipulated. And we have a hell of a lot of work to do in a very short time to safeguard our next election, and by extension, all the elections to come.
The notion of stolen elections is something we assign to third world countries, but not to this beacon of freedom and democracy that we like to view ourselves as. I mean, it's just something we don't want to consider.
For some reason, this issue makes me feel this tick, 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 and I don't quite know what's ticking. But I just feel that if we don't solve this thing pretty quickly, we could lose everything within just a few years.
We have grown to believe that democracy within itself has the power to intrinsically protect itself and defend itself. And we don't believe that it's on our shoulders as individuals, that we have to stand up and take measures to defend this democracy. We just assume that it's going to perpetuate itself. And it's up to us to be vigilant and to have stamina and be determined It's the individuals who have to make that stick.